Pronto, agora. Olá, gente, boa noite. Muito bom estar aqui nesse espaço para falar sobre direção de arte. Eu sou Carol Tanajura e é uma alegria imensa receber aqui na Semana ABC, junto com Claudia Andrade, Inbal Weinberg. Você me corrija depois se eu errei quase, né? Nós, do Departamento de Arte, sentimos sempre a necessidade dos encontros. Dividir e compartilhar nos faz crescer. Na troca, temos sempre muito o que aprender. Obrigada, ABC, por esse momento. Obrigada, Inbal, pela disponibilidade e entusiasmo na missão da valorização da direção de arte através do mundo. Inbal Weinberg é diretora de arte de filmes como Suspiria, A Filha Perdida e o Quarto, Lado. E hoje ela falará sobre seu processo criativo nesses trabalhos. Obrigada pela presença de todas e todos. E seja bem-vinda, Inbal, e vamos falar sobre direção de arte.
Só para avisar todo mundo que a Inbal vai apresentar em inglês, mas as perguntas depois vocês podem fazer em português, porque ela entende, tá bom? E se precisar de um tradutor simultâneo, tem aí na sala. Obrigada.
Muito obrigada. Oi, gente. Tudo bem? I'm going to speak in English because my Portuguese is not good enough, but I'm going to try to be slow. And as was said, I understand everything, so feel free to ask afterwards in Portuguese. So I just want to start by saying thank you so much to the people of Semana ABC and my colleagues here and my colleagues in Prada who brought me here. I love Brazil and I visit often, so it's a real honor to be here and be part of the community during this beautiful week. I'm sure you all listened to many conversations during the week, mostly about cameras and lenses and technical stuff, and I'm really happy to be closing this week with an invitation to join the beautiful world of production design. I'm sure there's many Diretoras de Arte here in the audience, so I appreciate everybody being here. And my presentation is called Transcending Borders. The reason why I chose that title was number one, because I'm here in Brazil and I get to speak to you all. And then number two is because the films I'm going to speak about were shot in different places, different countries, and more importantly, all of them were shot in countries where the story wasn't set. So one country had to become another place, which we do often in films, and it's kind of a story of how we world build. So I thought that was a common thread for the project. I'm going to just walk up and down the stage as I speak to you all, because I feel like it's a little bit more interesting that way, and I'm going to talk about the images. So the three films that we're going to speak about are Suspiria, The Lost Daughter, and The Room Next Door. Suspiria I made with director Luca Guadagnino in Italy, but the film itself is set in Germany. The Lost Daughter I made with director Maggie Gyllenhaal in Greece, but the film is set somewhat in the US. And The Room Next Door I made with the maestro Pedro Almodóvar, and we made it in Spain mostly, but all of it takes place in New York. So I'm going to speak about each one of these projects, starting with the research process, how we thought about the visual world of the film, where the whole idea came from, and then we're going to speak a little bit about the locations, our process of building, and I'm going to take one set from each movie and talk through the specific details of that set, thinking about how we went from one universe into another, from one country or from one era into another. So we're going to start with Suspiria. All right. So Suspiria is a film that I made with Luca Guadagnino. I received the script, and it was super interesting because it kind of revolved around a few different themes that I really love. One of them was Berlin, that I really love deeply. One of them was the 1970s, and then it was also modern dance. So that kind of combination doesn't come around often. For those of you who love horror movies, the original Suspiria is kind of a cult film that is made by the master horror filmmaker Dario Argento, also in Italy in the 70s. But we took another route for the visuals of the film, even though the story is very similar. So I put here the story for those of you who haven't seen the film. Young American dancer who is played by Dakota Johnson, Susie Bannion. She arrives in Berlin in the 1970s, and she's auditioning for this very well-known dance company that is called Helena Marcos, whose kind of head choreographer is played by Tilda Swinton. And then as she kind of starts getting into this world of dance, she starts understanding that strange things are happening indoors in this dance conservatorium. I won't say more. But we're going to start with the research process, because as soon as I received the script, it was sort of like I knew what the film was going to look like, which happens every once in a while. Maybe it's happened to you. But I just kind of knew immediately what images to pick, where to go. I did a really, really large presentation for Luca. I think it was 100 pages of images, and I think he knew immediately that I saw the movie that he saw, and that was probably what got me the job. So some of these research images I already had when I started, and some of them I just continued to look. So I am going to speak about the research process because I think it's a really important part of not just the design process, but everybody else that's in the movie gets to understand the world that we're going to build together. So in terms of Suspiria, Germany in the 1970s, especially Berlin, was a super interesting place, mostly because of the wall. And the wall was a very big element for us as well, because our main set was actually right outside of the wall. And I had to build the wall twice, actually, once in Italy and once in Germany. So I got to know the wall very, very well. And so a lot of images from the period, so images from fine art photography, from references from newspapers, archives, and so on. Specifically, we were looking for this grim look in the 1970s in Berlin, especially the neighborhoods right next to the wall were almost devastated. Nobody wanted to live there, and things were left very neglected. And so as you can see in these details, and actually research doesn't just give you the details of the architecture, which are also very important, but you get a feel, right? You get this feeling of cold, muted colors, the kind of 70s dreariness that some of Berlin was feeling at the time. I mean, the history is so difficult in that place, and it was like a world kind of split in the middle with the wall. And what's interesting for us is that Berlin no longer exists. If any of you have been in Berlin recently, it's a super happening place. Most of these buildings have gotten renovated, they're repainted, all of the graphics are different, and so on. So that also meant that we couldn't really shoot what we wanted in Berlin because it's almost impossible to find. You can find little bits of a bygone universe, but if you want to shoot a movie about Berlin in the 70s, most of it can no longer happen in Berlin. I wanted to show you another couple of slides about the wall, which we knew that we had to recreate. So the top images are images from the time. We really wanted to see how close the wall was to the other neighborhoods, for example. You can see what a feeling you get like walking through that close to the wall on that street. We wanted to know what kind of things were written on the wall, what sort of graffiti of the 70s. And I actually went to Berlin for a research trip, and these two images in the bottom are from the museum, the Wall Museum. So I just wanted to kind of put these images in here to talk about how important it is to actually do the research, to go to museums. I mean, I took pictures of every plaque, every explanation, every photo inside the museum, and the outside of it, there's an actual trace of wall. So we walked in there, we measured things, we took photos of the texture, which is really, really important because my Italian painters in Italy had to know exactly what the wall felt like, what the concrete felt like, and this type of texture means a lot to them. So a lot of times doing research that is actually in the place is important. And when I went on this research trip, I also did research, for example, took pictures of the sidewalks, the pavement, the street signs, old mailboxes. So a lot of architectural details that we already knew we would have to recreate in Italy. A little bit more about the research for this film, because it was a really research-heavy movie. And Luca Guadagnino, if you guys know, he is actually an interior designer, and nowadays also, and he's amazing he just has impeccable taste. So we thought a lot about what is the vibe that we want this main set to look like, the Helena Marcos Dance Company. And we both settled, we were actually on the same page exactly. We settled on this look of early modernism, which is a style of architecture that is like the forefathers of modernism. It's from the late 1900s, early 20th century. Most of these architects were actually based in Vienna. This image, for example, is by an architect called Adolf Loos. And these architects were kind of fighting against this decorative trend that was going on in the world, and they were saying, no, we want clean lines, we want clean materials, elegant, but without ornament. In fact, Adolf Loos released this book that was very controversial that was called Ornament is Crime. Like, no ornament, everything cleaner, a little bit more modern. And so we were really attracted to that because it kind of conveyed a time period between like the eras where perhaps the main set, you're wondering, when was this built? Like, is there an older history here? And it's also very demure, it's severe. So when you walk into that building, you're kind of wondering about what this dance company is like, how demure they are, how serious they are. So as you can see, the use of marble, of wood, very clean lines, some more images like that from other architects of the period. You can see the, again, use of the clean lines. These images are from like the 20s and 30s, use of steel, where it already goes to formica, reflective surfaces. And I put this image here because it's from Metropolis. And because it's really interesting to see at the time how that kind of modernist sensitivity translated to the screen, and films that were made in the time really kind of embraced this almost Art Deco look, which I thought was really interesting. And I'm just telling you, remember the floor pattern for later. Okay, and then another really interesting part of the research was modern dance, which I really love. I used to work at a dance company, and I know a lot about contemporary dance world, so that to me was such an interesting world. The main guru of this dance company is kind of like a Martha Graham / Pina Bausch person. This is Martha Graham, this photo, and you can see, you know, there's like an early connection between dance and witchery, like magical, you know, from the beginning of dance. And the first contemporary dance or modern dance companies did a lot of dances about witchery, which is somehow connected to our movie as well. So I chose this image because it has like a really strong look, especially to Martha Graham. And then we have here a whole slew of images we took from ballet, we took from classic spaces to 1970s spaces, and you can see here the images of Pina Bausch and Mary Wiggum, who is like her mentor. And these images not only help the art department, they help costumes, makeup, and if you have seen the film, you can see that Tilda Swinton's character really kind of models herself on Pina Bausch. A lot of these images were used by all of us. Lastly, I wanted to speak about a very interesting part of the research that was perhaps the most complicated, is the kind of supernatural elements of our movie. Because we knew we had, let's say, an underworld that involved witches, but it's not as easy to research. Like, obviously, I knew where to go for 1970s Berlin and contemporary dance. Where do you go for something that doesn't really exist in your universe? So it took us a while to figure it out. We went to a lot of sort of elements. We definitely embraced surrealism, performance art, and really artists that were able to break through the realist world. So this is a bit of a mix of a lot of our influences: surrealist art, early dance pieces, 1970s performance art, mostly by feminist artists, and contemporary installation art. And all of that played into how we built our underworld. Okay. A little bit about our color palette, just to kind of talk about that particular way of working. You know, on every film you have to talk through the color palette and you're trying things out. On this film, we decided to take some of our favorite paintings that we found in the research, and I did this test of just sampling the colors from them and seeing what arrives. I think we had like maybe 10 images like this where I sampled the colors. And we started seeing some of the colors repeat themselves, like a lot of greens, browns, these deep reds, which actually very much connects to the time period. Like the 1970s had this palette already, especially in Europe and in Berlin in the time. Very muted colors. You could see it in fashion. You can see it in the streets. So this all made sense to us. So this way of working, where we took like incredible paintings and sort of used those as our guidelines, was really helpful. And usually I also do a color palette per set, not just for the movie, so that if you're doing a set and you have like a very large team and your team is out there buying things and creating stuff, and your prop master is looking at teapots, and your carpenter is, doing some piece of wood that they have to paint, that everybody has some sort of guideline when they're like, should I pick the red cup or the blue cup? And they could always go to the color palette for that particular set. Okay. We're going to go to locations, which is super exciting in this case, and quite an adventure. So I flew to Italy, and Luca and the producers said, okay, we have this incredible location. Let's go see it. It's a little bit crazy. So as you can see here in this slide at the top, we found ourselves at the top of a mountain in the north of Italy, surrounded by a forest. And at the top of the mountain is this closed-down Grand Hotel. It's been closed since the 60s, and it's the kind of Grand Hotel that maybe if you saw like Grand Hotel Budapest by Wes Anderson, it's that type of hotel. It's huge. At the time in the 20s and 30s, people used to go there for their vacations. There's a big grand ballroom, and it's got amazing architecture, a beautiful lobby. However, since it's been closed for decades, it's completely falling apart, doesn't have running waters, doesn't have electricity. There's like one family of caretakers living there. So I just added a few images so you can see the various dilapidated versions of the hotel. We had to scout it with flashlights. So we look around and we said, okay, this is amazing, but this is really crazy. It would take so much money to make this location work, as just even to connect it to electricity. So let's put this aside and let's go scout for other things. So we did like a whole scouting trip of North Italy, and we tried to find these type of locations, and we couldn't find anything as good as this. We knew that inside this hotel we can find all of our Marcus dance studio spaces and also build inside the hotel. And make it basically our production office during the shoot. So we returned to the space and we decided, okay, we're going to go for it. And it was a huge job of renovation and even just logistics for the movie crew itself. I am going to now speak mostly about the lobby. Again, if you didn't see the film, the lobby is this kind of impressive space The first scene of Susie entering the building, you kind of see this big lobby. It's important to explain the story. It's a little mysterious, and it repeats itself through the film. So this image here on the left is what the lobby looked like when we arrived. You know, everything was falling apart, stuff was missing, stuff had fallen off the walls. And also, I want you to look at the architectural style because it's very florid. Like when this hotel was built, it was kind of Art Nouveau. You have these big columns with the Corinthian columns at the top. There is the frieze with flowers and like little cupids. It's all very cute. The floor, which you can't see really in this image, but the floor is mosaic. It has like flowers on the floor. And so Luca and I immediately said, okay, I mean, the space is incredible. It's going to give us so much, like it's huge. You can see the mezzanine. You can look up. However, it's not the right style. So what do we do? Okay, so we started thinking of how to alter this space based on our research of early modernism and how to make it more clean, modern, demure, serious. So here is an image that my very talented art director in Italy, Monica Salustio, drew of our thoughts of how to make this lobby more in the style that we're looking for. So here you can see, well, of course, we returned it to its immediate, you know, like glorious past a little bit. But also, instead of the columns that we had before, you can see that we have rectangular columns or square columns. And you can see that at the top, instead of the frieze, for example, we're hiding the frieze, and you can't tell that there's all these Art Nouveau elements. Okay, but this, obviously, these kind of drawings are so beautiful, and they help you kind of get the vibe, but you can't tell from here what the colors would be, what the textures would be. So we started thinking, what would those be? And we went back to those photos that I showed you of the early architecture images, and we saw in them, let me go back there actually so we can all look at them together. So what we saw in them is, first of all, marble. So you see this green marble of Adolf Loos, it's very well known. It's an amazing stone that he used repeatedly on his projects, and it has like incredible texture, but also he used it in very clean lines. And we decided to use that type of marble in a lot of places. And how did we use it? Because, of course, we couldn't get marble. Our very talented painters, best painters I had ever worked with, because they're Italian, they knew these Italian painters have like, you know, hundreds of years of knowledge of painting, and they work on trompe-l'oeil, which is how to create materials that look like other materials. So they were able to take just wood, like plain wood, which is the material we work with the most, and create a marbling effect on it. So that's one thing I wanted to share. And then the other thing where I told you, right, look at the floor. So we were thinking about how to change the floor because it was just a mosaic that had nothing to do with the style we were going for. And I was looking at a lot of references for floor patterns, and, you know, nothing really worked. And then I remember this amazing photo I had found of Metropolis, and I really loved this pattern. And so I was like, let's play with this pattern, and we put it into our 3D mock-up that I'll show you later, and we started playing around with it. And then I realized that if we used it and then flipped it, it would sort of create an arrow shape, and the arrow is kind of inviting you into the main hall, the dance studio. So it had a kind of weird effect of kind of trying to pull you in. And so it really did work for us when we were trying to think of what elements would be a little bit mysterious about this place. So here I just wanted to show you our construction plans for, you know, just to go through our process. So we have ideas, and then they have to actually be turned into almost like architectural plans for everybody to understand. These are in Italian. So one is, of course, how we were going to make the floor, which here my Italian art director is telling her crew how we were going to do it, what we were going to fake. So we're going to fake granite and pink marble. And here you can see our plans of how to change the columns. You see the original columns, and then on top of them, how we were going to clad them with our faux material. Here I'm just going to show you our 3D mock-up. Now, nowadays we can do incredible 3D mock-ups. This is being pretty, I would call this like really rough. We used a program called SketchUp, which we kind of use just as basics. This movie, I know maybe it doesn't look it, but we didn't have any money. So we did this sort of just like to show everybody what is going to happen, and also to test things. So you can see here that we're going to have this floor, as I mentioned, with the kind of arrow feeling inside. We kind of tested what all the green is going to look like, how we're going to have the frieze at the top. And these kind of mock-ups are really, really helpful, not just for the art department, but mostly for the rest of the team, because often the art department can see things in its mind's eye that other departments can't see. So this is really helpful to talk to everybody about. And now when you're looking at this model, you're kind of saying, wow, this is a big space. What is going to be in it? So to speak a little bit about the furniture and what we call the set decoration, we thought, okay, this is a lobby. It doesn't really need a lot of furniture because lobbies usually have just people waiting in them. Maybe we need 2 parts of like maybe seating areas. And of course, since we didn't have much money, we were trying to figure out what to use in order to have very elegant looking furniture. So our number 1 asset was Luca Guadagnino, because he's very well known in Europe and he has so much taste and is kind of like a tastemaker. So many sort of well-known furniture companies wanted to work with us to display their stuff and to work with Luca. And so we were able to get a lot of favors from high-end companies. And the other asset that we had was this falling apart hotel, where we spent days going through all of these rooms and finding bizarre pieces of furniture that have probably been there since the last century. So we combined these things, and you could see that at the top here. So 2 of the images are of furniture that we literally just found in the corners of this falling apart hotel. One you can see is really interesting, kind of 1960s, mid-century modern armchair, and this other sofa here is this demure, almost like Biedermeier style sofa. And then we use these 2 pieces of fabric from a very, very well-known company in Milan called Diretoras that I had the pleasure of going to and picking fabrics and showing to Luca and so on. And so we reupholstered these furniture pieces that we found with this super, super fancy fabric. Here you can see we were trying to figure out what kind of lights would work for us that look modernist, very clean, could be kind of timeless. So we found these lights in vintage stores in Milan as well. My set decorator was going around Milan in the vintage area. And I wanted to show you these 2, which are my designs for the carpets. Once again, we were very lucky to work, thanks to Luca, with a super fancy company called Cogolin from France. They've been making carpets for like 100 years. And they let us look at their archives. And I found these similar to these designs from like their, 1920s probably carpet. And so I got to redesign their carpets and recolor them, and we worked together to make these carpets that they made for us for very little money, which was amazing. Of course, they got stuck in customs and took us like 10 weeks to get them, but in the end, we made it. And getting close to the end, I just wanted to share the behind the scenes we all love, and that way we kind of get to thank the amazing team that's behind every frame of a movie. So you can see our carpenters on scaffolding. Here you can see how we basically clad over that frieze that had the Art Nouveau elements with the faux marble, and also we did faux copper, which is another element we used. Here you can see how we repainted the ceiling, which perhaps is like a small thing, not a small thing to repaint, but perhaps you think maybe it's not important, but look how the difference with this gray ceiling, especially number 1, you can't tell that it's flaking and falling apart, but number 2, it really kind of added this interesting thing to the lights that before you kind of didn't notice the lights, and now they're really popping. And then at the top, you can see our carpenters and painters putting in the floor. And here is the final image. This is a picture that is taken as we were shooting. So you can see outside the wall that we built with a little bit of green screen. And these two images are here from the actual movie. So one is Susie entering the hall, and one is Susie sitting with the dance teachers, and you can see the street that we built outside in the middle of a forest and our wall. So that is the culmination of that project and how we found ourselves in the middle of a mountain in Italy, but actually in an interesting version of Berlin, a witch's version of Berlin. Great. We're going to move to another era altogether and another film altogether. This is The Lost Daughter, which I made with Maggie Gyllenhaal in 2020. And very quickly, this is based on a book by a well-known author from Italy, Elena Ferrante, and it's about Lita Caruso, a literature professor. She goes on vacation, and she meets this woman and her child on an island on the beach, and it brings up very painful memories from her own motherhood period, to those of you who haven't seen the film. So I'm just going to talk a little bit, again, about the beginning of the project, how it all came about, and where it ended up happening. So when Maggie sent me the script originally, the story took place in the United States. She adapted the Italian book, and it became a kind of Cape Cod, if you guys know it. It's sort of like a beach town version of in the US. And so we were meant to make the film in the US, and then the pandemic happened. In fact, I got the script like maybe 3 weeks into the pandemic, and I thought my agents were just trying to please me. I was like, you guys, I know no movies are getting made. I don't know why you're sending me the script. But they were like, no, this is real. And so we started working on this film when no one was making any movies in the world. New York was really, really bad. Everyone was dying. And we were trying to figure out how to make this movie. Everything was closed in the universe, so we realized we can't make this movie in the US at all, because not only was it pandemic time, but Trump took the opportunity to take all the visas for the artists out of circulation. So nobody could come in. Our actors who were not from the US, our DP, and so on. So we're like, okay, where else can we shoot? And we started doing all this virtual scouting around the world, thinking about Canada. We did all these scouts. And then one day in one of our Zoom meetings, as we're all stuck in quarantine, Maggie was like, what about Greece? And then all of a sudden, everything started happening. I was like, I think she said Greece. And so we ended up in Greece. We thought the film would never happen because nothing was shooting in the world. It was like 2 movies maybe were shooting. It was before anyone even thought of vaccines. And we just got parachuted to this island in Greece. Beforehand, I did a lot of virtual scouting with a team of scouts in Greece, and we found this one island that we thought would work for us. So, just to talk a little bit about the research for this film, so Greece. What kind of Greece? And so it was important for us to not have that Greece be what our French DP Alain Louvert called carte postale, like a postcard, a tourist place, like something has to be a bit dark about it. Something has to be a bit uncomfortable. And so how to make that in a place that's obviously so beautiful. And so I think that this image helps to show it a little bit. It feels a bit like the island is closed. We see these boats that aren't actually in use. We really like these, like old telephone poles where you kind of feel like, oh, this is maybe a bit stuck in time. In the back, you can see the tourist boats where you're like, oh, right, it's also a tourist place. And so more imagery like that. I wanted to also share imagery of a painting because I think it's really interesting to add different media when you're doing research, because it helps not just to obviously show what you want to show, which is a landscape, but explain that perhaps this film, maybe it's not as realistic. Maybe it is a bit more impressionistic. You can show that also in your research, in the kind of research that you use. So using painting is very helpful to just get a mood across for what kind of film you're making. And then the other imagery, you know, a kind of closed down island or an island at night, which becomes a little bit mysterious. I think that actually you could feel that in our movie. Also, a lot of our scenes happened on a beach. So what kind of beach do we want to make it? So again, it's like this mix, like, okay, the beach itself is of course perfect, but some things may taint a little bit this perfection, like all these tourists show up, there's like beach furniture. So there are things that are happening that sort of break through Lida's perfect vacation that she had in her mind, which I feel like we all have in our minds when we go on vacation and we realize that's not really the case. Then talking about her house that she has on the island, you know, another idea of like, of course, we love these amazing images of Greece and these beautiful classic furniture pieces, but how to make the house a little bit like maybe a bit old, a bit falling apart, definitely use some kind of dated appliances, or you kind of feel like maybe this house is a tiny bit neglected, or one of those island houses that people don't really use often. And more importantly, and what I wanted to talk about is that in the movie, Lida goes back to flashbacks from her motherhood, and they all take place in the US. Her and her husband and her 2 young daughters are living in a small apartment somewhere on the East Coast, maybe in New York, maybe in Boston, where they're both professors or they're studying in the university. So how do you, in the middle of a tiny island in Greece, create the US? Especially since this island, number one, didn't allow cars, which we only realized when we arrived there. My production vehicle was a motorcycle. And it was a very, very small island with barely any shops. All the shops were closed because of COVID. It had maybe 4,000 people on it. So how do you create the US? So very important, which is something that I also understood after many years of, at this point, working abroad, which I think that title of Transcending Borders is part of, is that you feel like your culture is obvious. It's obvious to you and you think everybody is going to understand what you're talking about if you're saying like, oh, a New York apartment, or in your case, like a Sao Paulo apartment, or anything. But in fact, that's not that obvious to people from other cultures who have completely different architectural language, and to them, they live very beautifully and comfortably in their own architecture. And so when you say something to them, you have no idea how it's going to be received. And so thinking about that, the kind of research that I would do if I were making this movie in the US is not the same research. So what I wanted to show is at the top there is a kind of more impressionistic, you know, elements from design magazines, books, fine art photography. But what I have in the bottom are actually images from sites that do rentals of apartments in New York, or sublets of apartments, which in New York everybody sublets their apartments, so we have a lot of websites for that. And I even left the logo here so you can see why is this important, because I was trying to explain to my crew in Greece, okay, this is a typical molding in New York. If you say pre-war apartment in New York, this is a typical molding. This is what our floors would look like. This is the kind of windows. You always have a radiator. This is a kitchenette in New York. Like, it would be super obvious to my team in New York, but it's really not obvious for people in Greece. Similar to here, which is really helpful. For example, I was like, this is a kind of fireplace that we have in all of our brownstones, or look at the molding under the window, which you see this molding under the window. It's exactly like this molding. You know, that kind of stuff is really, really helpful because you just assume things are obvious to you and they're not to everybody else. And I think I also know that because I myself am an immigrant I moved to the US, my country looks nothing like the US. And so now I have to explain the US to somebody else. I sort of have that understanding. So once again, a crazy location, which I feel like it's my niche. So we ended up on this island, and one of the reasons why it's really helpful to us and is unusual is because this island has a very big, very beautiful neoclassical boarding school that was built in the early 1900s by this rich Greek person who wanted to elevate his island. And so you see this big structure here. It's beautiful, very neoclassical, really elegant, tons of rooms, and it had closed down in the 80s. It was like a prestigious boarding school. It closed down. So right now they don't know what to do with it. They host events there, and some of it is completely falling apart. Some of it is used as storage, you know how it goes. So as I did virtual scouts, my scouts on the island were like, hey, look, we found this kind of amazing school here. And I was like, whoa, go in, take pictures of every room. This could be our studio. It could be our production office. It could be where our workshops are. We can build sets in there. That's kind of what I always look for on indie films. We had very, very little money for this movie. So immediately try to find a space where you could have everybody together and use it as much as possible. So we indeed ended up using it as basically a stage. All of our offices were there. It's where our crew was, our canteen, our workshops. And I was trying to find where we can build this New York apartment. So I walked around all the rooms, and luckily one building that was closed to everybody else because it was too falling apart is where I found this big room. Obviously, it's where they stored all of their crap, and you had to really look beyond it. And I saw that we had enough space and this really interesting opening, and maybe we could create an apartment there. So once again, I had my amazing Italian, they let me have my Italian art director, and so she did this really beautiful painting based on what we were trying to portray. So even though the painting is mostly kind of to give you a vibe of what this apartment would be, you could also tell a lot of architectural details about it. First of all, it has wood floors. There's that fireplace that you saw. These type of windows from a New York apartment or an East Coast apartment, very specific moldings, and it even has moldings on the walls and the French doors. That is how we explained we would have one room go into another room, which is also kind of classic New York style. I wanted to show you that I did these color palettes for each set, as I told you before, so I had a color palette specifically for this set. And also, since it was like a bit of a mess in that building, we had to explain to everybody how we're going to connect the apartment. So the apartment, it wasn't a set we built on stage, right? So we had to explain to the crew, to the director as well, okay, look, we found 4 rooms that could make this apartment. So imagine that the kitchen, the living room is here, the girls' room is in another room, you go across the hall, and that's where we're gonna shoot the bathroom. It was really like trying to fit everything together to make you feel like you're in a real apartment, so that the DP has to know if a character is walking out of this room, it's as if they walked into that room, right? So you have to actually explain your inside, your imaginary architecture to everybody so that everybody knows, oh, you can't just open a door here and go to there. Like, everything has to make sense, even in a kind of fake set. And then, again, we did something very, very, very amateurish, just so people could tell in SketchUp what is our idea of how to build that room I just showed you into a kitchen, a living room, a master bedroom, and so on. And we sort of showed that to people as we were going to start, and we needed them to understand what we're doing. Now, I wanted to talk a little bit about what it means to actually go from the research of the architecture to actually building the architecture. So just, again, very quickly, some construction drawings. As I mentioned, some of these architecture is not native to Greece. So you could see that my art director, she started with an image of the room, and then she really explained in detail what kind of windows we're doing, down to the hardware. And I also know that in Brazil, people don't really use guillotine windows that often, but they are the only windows that we use in New York. So you really do have to explain to people how to build these windows down to the locks. Like, it's happened to me already on 2 movies where I was like, guys, where's the sash locks? And everybody's like, the what? You know, so you really have to explain down to the little details, because then you also have to procure that hardware that doesn't exist, for example, in Greece. And then here you can see how we built the fireplace, and she explained it really well and even did a 3D model of it. And here, just a little bit, I wanted to show you the kind of background, you know, the behind-the-scenes images. And I picked images especially to show how we clad this room to make it be more malleable for the architecture we were going for. So you can see we remade all the windows. They didn't even have, like, the right ratio of American windows, so we changed the ratio. We put floor, all real floor, which is very exciting, and we created these kind of architectural details on the walls. And then I also just wanted to kind of tip my hat to our props and set decoration team and just show you a little bit of a montage of what they were doing every day. So we were stuck on the island. We couldn't get off. They couldn't get on because of COVID. So every day we had buyers in Athens going to all of the thrift stores trying to find stuff. They would fill a van. The van would go on a ferry. The ferry would come to the island. We couldn't touch anything for like 2 days because that was the COVID regulations, and only then could we get to it. So it was like a really insane process, and you can see that some of these images are really pictures of like our buyers being like, does this look like an American doorknob? So a lot of the stuff when you're trying to create a different culture, okay, what works? For example, type, right? So anything that had anything in English in it, oh yeah, it says addresses, get it. First aid kit, get it. A lot of packaging. Like we always think, what makes a culture visible on screen? It's packaging, it's lettering, right? So as soon as we were trying to find a lot of American type packaging for the kitchen, for example, appliances and electronics is really important, especially also it was a flashback, so it was period. So electronics are always so important for period, but actually appliances is really hard because you think that appliances are kind of the same around the world. They are not. And for example, the stove, it was a month-long process to try to figure out how to make this stove American. I really insisted. We ended up building part of the stove to look normal because, you know, my set decorator was like, hey, we found a stove. And I was like, I've never seen a stove like that in the US, guys. Like, I don't know what you're talking about. So, you know, this is like a long process that you don't really recognize when you are watching the movie, but it gives you the sort of extra layer on top that makes it feel real. And because this movie, we didn't have money, plus it was hardcore COVID, we couldn't really bring a lot of things from the US. I wanted to show you the final images. So the film itself is very impressionistic. You never have like a master of the apartment, but it's always in the background in these kind of scenes between the mother and the daughters, and you do get a feel for a kind of, you know, East Coast American apartment. Some of these images are from us and some of the images are from the movie. I feel like the colors work really well and the kind of architectural details really lent themselves to the film. And I think I have another slide where you can see how we remade a bathroom, the girls' room, and we had a lot of these kind of shots where you can't tell, but you can always tell, you know? For example, look at this. I'm very proud of this molding. It's a super New York molding, you know? And I wanted to say that it's not just that it's important for us to get it right. It's really important for the actors to feel at home, and also for the director, right? So this comes from a very special kind of personal place for the director and the actors, and they need to really feel like they're in the place. So I feel like this film kind of worked because we were all missing home, right? We like all of a sudden had to leave our New York apartments and got landed on this island and the world was falling apart, and we were saying, like, would we ever see our homes again? And so we got to construct a mini version of our home. And when Maggie walked through the set for the first time, she cried. So I feel like that's always a win, right? Great. And let's see, I think, I may need a new clicker. Could somebody click to the next image for me? Yeah, thank you. Okay, great. So our last image is going to be, our last project is going to be one of my last films, The Room Next Door, which I was very honored to make with the master, Pedro Almodóvar. I'm a huge fan of his, so I was so happy that I got a chance to work with him, and it was really kind of by chance. And so the way that this film started, which I think is a great way to sort of end the conversation, is that Pedro decided for the first time to make a film that is not set in Spain, a feature, not set in Spain, that is made in English with English-speaking actors and is about a different place. And he told us many times that he is hoping to kind of take himself outside of his own comfort zone and try something different. So he usually works with the same team, same DP, same art director for many, many, many years in Spain. And this time, because not only because it was about New York, but also because we were going to shoot a small part of it in New York, he kind of decided to maybe invite some other crew members to join. So it was mostly myself and the DP who were the new kids on the block. The DP was Spanish, Edu Grau, but works in Hollywood, and I was just kind of landed there as a New Yorker. And my biggest thing was, how do we marry the New York universe and the Pedro Almodóvar universe? So to start to speak on that, what is the story for those of you who haven't seen the film? Also based on a book, loosely. This novelist, Ingrid, she reconnects with her old friend Martha, who's a war correspondent, and she realizes that Martha has terminal illness. She visits her in the hospital, and Martha has given up the fight, and she is considering ending her life. And she asks Ingrid to join her on this retreat to kind of enjoy their last days together. Super dark material that Pedro decided to kind of treat in a very colorful, sort of very beautiful and rich way. And as I said, it was really important to me as I was starting to think, okay, well, what are we gonna do with Pedro's universe? I mean, the biggest challenge on that film was Pedro Almodóvar has such a well-known, very rich world of imagery, of colors that he has perfected over, I don't even know, 40 years of making films. And so how do you take that world that we all know well and love and connect it with the New York universe, which is very gritty, very real, you know, there's not as much color, it has a different light. So that was where I felt like this was my responsibility. And Pedro said it as well. He said, okay, we're trusting you to let us know if something is working and not working. But that's one thing to say, and another thing to try to do that in a Pedro Almodóvar universe. Sorry, can I have the next slide? So my first way of kind of approaching this idea was, how can we get Pedro to be familiar with homes of New York residents, right? And Pedro was really open. He's super curious to know how people are living. He's always absorbing new ideas and just enjoys kind of discovering spaces. He loves design, obviously. So the reason I have this exact slide here is because in the script, the main character, Martha, her apartment has very large windows that are overlooking this amazing New York City landscape, right? Skyscape, let's call it. And I was reading the script and I was saying, which writer in New York could afford this view? It's only like multimillionaires that would have a view like this. So I started trying to find people with this view. Meanwhile, unbeknownst to me, of course, classic, one of Pedro's best friend in New York is this woman, Kim Hastreiter, who is well known because she started the Paper magazine. She's kind of like a punk, hip woman who has become very successful, and she bought this amazing apartment and it has this view. This is actually the view from her apartment. So, of course, that's the reference that Pedro had, and it was indeed one of our main references, which I will return to later. So we went to visit this apartment many times, and I understood that that is the view that he wants to see. You know, Pedro is very theatrical, so he just wants to see this expansive views as if it's a 1950s movie. So it was definitely not going to be that kind of New York of the indie world, you know. So, yeah, this is not going to work. So is there a way for me to change the clicker, or do I just ask every time? I guess. Could you? Yeah. Thank you. Okay, so these images here are a little bit of everything. We have some from Kim's apartment, as she's very cool, and she is kind of very colorful. This is kind of extra colorful for New York, I have to say. Some are images that we have found in our research, like this is Cindy Sherman's apartment, some Jonathan Adler, and so on. And some of these images, like this one, is from a group of writers that I got in touch with to kind of talk to about what it means to be a writer in New York, because our movie's about 2 writers. And what was even better is that we were able to get in touch with the war correspondents, because Martha is a war correspondent, and we really wanted to know what their world is about and get to the kind of really essence of their little details. So when Pedro came to New York to scout, it was a scout to see some locations, but it was also a scout for inspiration, to kind of get a feel for a culture that he really didn't know. And we ended up shooting 2 weeks maybe in New York, maybe 10 days, but the rest of the movie we shot in Spain, so we had to really kind of bring all of that style in. Can I see the next slide? And as I was mentioning about, thank you, about war correspondents' homes. So just to show you the kind of research that we did, we took these photos. So for example, one of the war correspondents, we took pictures of her entire office to see exactly what she had on. These are 3 different offices. So for example, this woman had a picture of herself with the Taliban that we actually photoshopped as well our heroine into. We looked at like all the certificates you have on the wall, what kind of knickknacks you have on your shelves, like memorabilia from different places that you've covered, and even what you had in your drawers, your notebooks, and so on, because all of those details were going to come together later on. No? Can I have the next one? Okay, so now we're going to speak about the first set here, which was actually built on a stage. So for the first time, we didn't shoot on a location. We had to build the entire thing. So I wanted to show you the floor plan. We're going to speak about what you see inside, and then we're going to speak about what you see outside, which ended up being just as important. So the way that Pedro works, which is really, really unusual, is that he asks for his sets to be ready over a month before you start shooting, and he has his actors start rehearsing in the sets months before we start shooting, even when they're half built, which is very, very stressful for a production designer. And I told the actresses the first time they came, like, I feel like you're seeing us like half naked, like I don't know what to say, I apologize. And everybody was super cool about it, and they themselves enjoyed seeing the thing take shape. But for Pedro, which he mentions a lot, he says that he can't just work on what the set would look like and not understand what the clothes would look like in the set, or what the hair and the clothes would look like in the set. And so he kind of designs everything as a whole. And every decision he makes, it changes another decision. So we had the sets built a month in advance, then we did camera tests in the set with the clothes and the hair and makeup, and based on those tests we changed some things and we did other tests. So it's a very, very long process. I feel very honored because I had an insane amount of prep time, which I thought was crazy. And I thought, oh man, I'm gonna just like enjoy the first 5 weeks, do nothing. And then from the first day I was working till 9 p.m. in the office. And I was like, oh, okay, that's why, got it. But so Pedro is part of every decision, and he has to kind of approve every piece of fabric, every cup, and so on. So it's a very long process of collaboration. He's really open to ideas, but he checks in on the process again, again, again. So as we were building, he would come visit at least once a week, and we would go through all of these things together. Okay, so since we're speaking about how to bring New York to Spain, this time we really did need to bring New York, because we were building 3 or 4 sets that were New York on a stage. So I had a crew working in New York, a set decorator and buyers, and they were going around buying things, and we shipped an entire container to Spain in order to put those elements into our sets. So can I get the next slide? So I just wanted to show you a kind of interesting, again, collage of all of the different things we were thinking about and how to make Martha's apartment more New York. So, for example, some of it is cultural significance. So I was thinking, okay, Martha is a culture person in New York. She's hip, she's in the circles. She would definitely go to the New York Film Festival, which is an institution in New York. And the New York Film Festival, which is in Lincoln Center, has this beautiful, tradition of making a very well-known posters for its films. And so I was like, well, I bet she would have a poster of the New York Film Festival. And I started showing Pedro all of the posters, and one of them was his. Like, he had designed one of the posters, and I was like, oh, right, did not recognize that that was yours. Anyway, that was working with Pedro Almodóvar every day. So we picked this really beautiful Nikki de Sanfal poster, which I was like, see, this is something where if a New Yorker saw it, it would make sense to them. So some of it is culture. Some of it is, okay, what kind of magazines would be in the house? What kind of newspapers? Again, obviously, Pedro's really design-oriented, and he cared about every book in the apartment. We actually had to get every book approved, even on the shelves, of which we had many. And we purchased, I don't even know, 2,000 books in New York, and we shipped them in the container. We actually went through all of the photos of the books in the war correspondent's house in Brooklyn that I shot, and we purchased each one of the books that she had. That's how specific Pedro is about the books. Other things, so paper magazine, which is where the characters worked, was really important to us. So we had all of the paper magazine covers, and one of them ended up being a poster in the set. The very little things, which we call life layer. In the US, we call it life layer. And you don't think about it until you start collecting, but my set decorator in New York is like an expert at life layer. So you can see here, this is all of the food that she kept from like a month of eating, and she kept all of the packaging so she could send it to us. All of the vitamins and the kind of medicine that you always have in your house that make absolute sense to you, and maybe nobody in Spain is going to understand. She sent all of that. Little cards, like the Metro card in New York, which is so essential, you know. Cards of like, I'm a member of this museum, and this and that. Tote bags. And you know how you have those like drawers of knickknacks that you're like, I don't know what's in this drawer, just throw everything in there. It's very specific to where you're from. So these kind of things is what make like the details right. And then I just added even, oh, by the way, the hangers that you get from the dry cleaners. Like if you show this to anyone in New York, they're like, yeah, obviously, this is how they come, you know? And so every little detail counts. And I also added 2 images from the MoMA design store because, of course, there had to be a lot of extra design elements in this woman's house. And since Pedro, I don't know if anyone here has been to the MoMA store in New York, highly recommended. So we just went nuts at the MoMA store and we bought everything. You can see, for example, the one at the top, it says one of each color. That's my Spanish set decorator telling my American set decorator that Pedro wants 1 cup of each color. And actually, that cup ended up being very featured, so that worked out. So that's kind of the world. And what was actually beautiful about this set is that one important scene is that the two characters are searching for something, and they open all the drawers, and they're looking for things. So we ended up actually having a close-up of drawers being emptied, and all of the stuff that looks like you will never see it was featured in close-up. So I was very proud of that. Can I go to the next slide? Great. So, okay, let's talk about the exterior, which often we think, okay, whatever, the most important thing is what's inside. But in fact, on this movie, it was really, really important to talk about what's outside of the window. And it was a very long process that we did together with the director of photography and the producers, which we called backings. So we were trying to figure out what to do about the outside. And this is kind of a general conversation that we often have in many movies where we build on stage. I'm sure many of you have had to deal with it. So here is an image of our set with a possible image of our psych, or whatever the backing was going to be. And you could see at the top that we had very large windows. And so what to do? Because obviously you're on a stage and you're going to have some logistical issues. How are you going to see New York outside? So usually we have the kind of three elements, three possibilities. Now, it used to be two possibilities, now it's three possibilities. One is the most old school way of doing things is to do a photographic background. In the olden days, it was actually hand-painted. As many of the kind of classic films of Hollywood, you could see that it's like this kind of beautiful hand-painted background. Nowadays, we do them with photography. It's actually like a really very complex, specific way of seaming a photograph to make it look like it has parallax, which is like what happens when you walk with the camera on a person. And then you sort of hang this really huge photograph around the set. It has its own advantages and disadvantages. That was one of our options. The second option was to use green screen, which is what often happens nowadays. And the third option, which is a new option that maybe you have heard about in other sessions here, is using an LED wall, which is a kind of volume stage, and you project an image on it. So we took time to consider all of these options. We talked through them with the cinematographer, the producers, because some of them are about cost. It's always at the end of the day about cost. The thing that the DP and I were really the DP and I worked really, really closely together on this movie, and we sort of both were very concerned about using green screen, which I'm usually concerned about. In this case, even more so, because what happens to production designers is that we are no longer part of the movie when the green screen gets figured out, right? The movie is in post, the VFX people are talking about it, you're not there. If you're lucky, you get a phone call, but maybe you don't hear about it. And so I was very concerned that whatever is going to be decided about the green screen is not going to look that great. And the DP, thankfully for me, was of the same opinion. And what we said is, we want control over this now. We want to know what these things are going to look like. We want to be able to adjust them on set through the camera. And what's more important, the actors, even though, of course, it doesn't look like New York, but somehow when you're there, it sort of a little bit does. And so it's one thing to act against a green screen and look at it and stare at the New York skyline, and another thing to actually stare at something. So that was important to us. Of course, as probably many of you know, there's also technical difficulties with green, where it kind of tints the image and many other things. So it was a really big process to try to persuade the production, which they're called El Deseo. They're actually the production company of Pedro Almodóvar. They're legendary. They've made all of his films for 40 years. So to convince them that even though they've used green screen for the past, I don't even know how many movies, 10 movies, this time we're going back to old school and we're going to produce a photograph. And in the end, it was actually a very beautiful decision, because Pedro kind of went for a really old school look. He kept bringing up these movies from the 50s where the background is obviously fake. Like, he showed us these pictures of Gregory Peck in the fountainhead behind this image of New York City where you know it was painted, and he was really into that. So it kind of took the backdrops into a different world. Usually we try to hide that they look fake, and he was embracing them looking fake, which was a really interesting process that the DP and I had to kind of work with because it was like a little bit out of our language. But could you go to the next slide? I'll just explain a bit more. So what we did is we returned to Kim's apartment, this apartment that had that incredible skyscape that I had never seen in New York because it's on Fifth Avenue. So the top images and the bottom images are from Kim's apartment that I took them. So it's overlooking Washington Square Park. It's, you know, overlooking these incredible like buildings of Fifth Avenue. And you can see here the kind of images you see through her windows. And so we worked with Roscoe, who are a very big, probably the most prominent backings maker in the business. And the way that this works is they send their special photographer to the apartment. The photographer is there for hours, for like the entire day, and he takes these panoramas of the space and he stitches them together in a way that works for us. And then there's a lot of back and forth about what the final image would look like. So you can see here in the middle, I had put this mega panorama of the image that we did for the backings. And for example, the first image, I was like, hey guys, you know, there's too many windows here with the same kind of like, can we change a few of the curtains? Or we had a building that was under construction and had scaffolding, and I was like, this building is gonna pop because it has a black net, let's change it. So we did some VFX on the backing, and it's very important to decide, which is also very technical for the DPs here, you know, the type of diffusion that it's going to have, because it is supposed to be much further than it really is. So there's a lot of kind of technical things that go into it. And could we go to the next slide? So we ended up testing a lot because everybody was a little concerned, especially like Pedro and his production team, about what it's going to look like. So when we received the image, we had put it into, in this case, no longer SketchUp. We did everything in Unreal. So we put it into Unreal, and we were able to almost like see what the characters are going to see whenever they're in the room. You could even do movies with it. You can move with it. So we were kind of like, these are really, again, very rough, and the people in these are not really important. But, okay, this is what you're going to see if she goes to the kitchen and if they're sitting next to each other. And as some of you perhaps know, because when you decide to do backings on stage, you have the problem of the stage floor, where if the camera looks down, it just sees the floor of the stage. So in order to avoid that, we built this really beautiful terrace, which is actually the terrace from Kim's, so we already had the real reference. And the terrace is basically like a safety zone for us to not see the stage floor. So you could see a little bit here that we did, and definitely up top, that we did this terrace with a lot of florals, like Pedro loves flowers, so it was another opportunity for us to really go for this lush look that to him was really important. And then because the backing doesn't move, which is the biggest problem of a photographic backing, if you have some live elements in the middle, mostly vegetation, then you can do some light wind and things are moving, and it really helps to kind of sell your background. Okay, can we go to the next slide? Great. This is just like a little bit of behind the scenes again. I want to show you our incredible moment of the container arriving from the US and us unloading it. And then a little bit of, as we were building on stage, you can see the large windows overlooking basically the stage. And you can see me floating in the air here as I was like organizing things from the other side. And I wanted to show you, this is one of our many, many, many meetings with Pedro. That's Pedro here, and his producers, and that's me and my team as we're showing him things. And because I was telling you, he chooses everything, or we choose together, but we have to show him many, 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 many options for stuff. He would come to the set, we would we changed the color of the kitchen 3 times. We repainted walls. And, you know, my crew explained it to me when I arrived in Spain. They're like, listen, just so you know, there's going to be a lot of last-minute changes. And I was like, come on, if we make the right decision, there will not be last-minute changes. I was wrong. So a lot of it was, it's not a big deal for them. They are used to working that way, and that's how they actually kind of structure their films and budget them. It's like, okay, there's going to be that stage of testing things out. So I was kind of pushing for a slightly more muted color palette, because I was trying to say in New York you would never have these colorful interiors, and I was pushing. Some of it worked and some of it was taken back. So like one of the colors I suggested, for example, mustard for the kitchen, we painted the kitchen mustard and it looked great, and then Pedro's like, that's not exactly right, let's change it. And you know, in this world it was possible. So it was a really interesting experience for me as well. And what you can see here, for example, is how many tests we did. So this is, you'll see probably the end result of this, but this is the couch we got pre-fabric. We showed Pedro maybe 1,000 fabric swatches. We had it on top here. We built this table and we showed it to him with various types of vinyls to decide what color it would be. All of this is just like tons of fabrics we're showing him. We tried maybe like 20 carpets, and this is all with him there testing it. So that is like a super unusual process, and in the end it all comes together in a kind of magical Almodóvar way. And so the next slide is going to, I think, show us the final result. Great. So I made like a little mix of photos to show you some of Martha's apartment, as I was telling you before about how we picked all of the books together with a ton of tchotchkes. Like Pedro loves tchotchkes, he brings them from his house. I wanted to show you Tarsila do Amaral because Pedro loves Brazil. He loves Brazil. And so I was like, when we were trying to figure out artists, I was like, what about Tarsila? And that worked out. There's like a mix of many, many different things, like Pedro's art and things that he loved with a lot of New York things. And you can see here that background of the city and how it kind of does sell that moment. And here I wanted to show you guys, as I told you, that there is this part where she just like empties like a whole slew of tiny things. So I was just really proud of this image, which is in the movie, where you have like a card of a Whitney member and like just, you know, Altoids, which is just stuff people have, you know, and it made that moment to me like really strong. And then one more image where we continue to see some of the sets. Great, thank you. So you can see the final result of that kind of couch space that I was showing you guys with the Pantone purchased in MoMA mug that we saw earlier. And some of the stuff is from Pedro's house, actually, and some of the stuff we picked together. This on the left is a Louis Bourgeois, a real Louis Bourgeois that he has in his apartment that I saw, and I was like, oh my God, Pedro, we have to put this in the set. And it made it. And also, what I wanted to share here is these really interesting images of the women against this background. So you saw before the 3D of the two women sitting that we were kind of doing in Unreal, and it sort of translated to what actually happened. I thought that what was really interesting in, you know, we lit this a little bit theatrically, right? So you kind of get a feeling of something a little bit maybe artificial about it. But images like this, I'm not sure we would be able to get them if we worked on the green screen, because you kind of catch these moments and you perhaps would not consider putting a camera right against a green screen if this wasn't there. What was even more beautiful is that Pedro loved the terrace, which you're not supposed to go onto. That was just our safety area. And so he decided to put the camera out there, and we even had shots from the terrace looking in. and you saw the backdrop reflecting onto the women. So a lot of this reflection stuff I felt like really just worked because this amazing backdrop was there and we can experiment with it a little bit. So yeah, in the end that worked out. And I think the last slide that I have, thank you, is our empty stage, which I was already in New York shooting the second unit, and my art director sent me this picture. He's like, okay, we got it done. We had like 3 days to get out of the stage, which is always how it goes. It's like, sure, you have time to build, but no time to wrap. So I just thought this was a kind of beautiful place to sort of end on, because, you know, it's where I said before, you sort of transcend borders, you transcend spaces, and for production designers, you get to this stage and you really, all you see is possibilities. So yeah, thank you for listening.
Essa aula de criatividade, de cor. Queria... Não está funcionando? Está funcionando? Primeiro dizer que maravilhoso, maravilhoso, assim, sem palavras, né? Suspiria, eu já te falei, é uma grande paixão minha. A gente vai abrir para as perguntas e eu queria começar com uma, porque além da Inbal ser essa diretora de arte incrível, além dela ser essa diretora de arte incrível, ela é uma das fundadoras do Production Design Collective. E eu queria que você falasse um pouquinho, né? Acho que foi onde a gente se conheceu, e é o que te motivou a criar o Production Design Collective e o que isso hoje significa para os diretores de arte mundialmente, né? Essa conversa que a gente tem. Queria que você falasse um pouquinho disso.
Thank you. Thank you for asking. So yeah, we're going to open it to questions from the audience, but we also wanted to speak about this organization that I started with a colleague, and these beautiful colleagues are part of, some of our colleagues in the audience, and it's called the Production Designers Collective. And we started it about 10 years ago because we felt like, as I'm sure many of you feel, that you source and you're building your own way of doing things, and you're not sure if you're doing things the right way. And often there's just one of us on a movie set, and maybe you can't really talk to the producers and you can't really talk to your crew, but the only people that would really understand your pain are other production designers. So we started this in New York with just a few, maybe 30 designers. Thank you. 30 designers, and we kind of sent an email around to our friends and said, we want to start this place where we can talk about stuff we can share. And now we have become the largest organization for production designers in the world. We have members from 90 countries, and I think over 1,500 production designers, many in Brazil, I'm very proud to say. And what we do is we create a platform for designers to speak to each other, to share experiences, to share advice. A lot of emerging designers that really need some mentorship on their first steps. Our biggest events now are a gathering that we do once every 2 years. It's like a retreat/conference on an island in Greece that Claudia's been to. And that is really our way to be together and talk about things that matter to us and talk about how to make our profession more creative, healthier, and more respectful. And what we also do, which is happening this year, is called Production Design Week, International Production Design Week, which is happening at the end of October, in which we organize events all over the world, working with a lot of associations around the world. We're working with Brada in Brazil, and these events are meant to really celebrate the art of production design and invite many other people into the celebration. So we do events with guilds for cinematography, for art departments. We do events at film festivals, with film academies. And the whole idea is that production design is a bit of an invisible field. It's sometimes difficult to explain to people what we do. And so this is a way to really embrace other people, really invite them, kind of open. I always feel like it's opening the door to the art department, like lifting the screen and really explain what we do, which hopefully, if we advocate more for ourselves, it would create, in the end, an opportunity to have a bigger say on a movie set.
Não, bom, vamos abrir para perguntas. Quem tem perguntas? Alguém pode levar o microfone lá, por favor? Obrigada.
Feel free to ask in Portuguese.
Tá bom. Na verdade, eu nem sei direito, mas é uma pergunta que me vem. Vocês, né, criaram o PDC e sonharam com algo e imaginaram o que aquilo traria. O que te surpreendeu mais agora, depois de 10 anos desse encontro mundial de diretores de arte?
You know, I love this question because I had this really interesting realization after our first gathering in Greece, which was in 2022, and it was a kind of dream that happened, right? I had to persuade people that it's never happened before, and I drove around LA going to all these famous production designers' houses that won Academy Awards, and I was like, look, this is the pitch. You come to Greece, you pay for your own trip. You pay for your trip to come to Greece, and then you get on a boat in Athens, and you travel to this island, which is, by the way, the island you all saw from Lost Daughter. It has become my island, and so I took it over, and now I invite the whole community. And, you know, people were unsure, especially production designers. As you know, all film people can't commit in advance, like our lives kind of are organized 1 week in advance. So to think about something that big. And so it was really a dream come true that it came together. We had 250 production designers from around the world that came, and we've done it for a second time. We had legends, real legends, Academy Award winners and so on. And what was the most surprising to me was that when we created the event, we thought, okay, it'll be a professional development event, right? People are going to listen, they're going to learn new things, we're going to speak about new technology, similar to how it is here, and also share more specific experiences. What I didn't realize was that it was going to be very emotional. The emotional part of it was so incredibly strong. Like, people are crying every day just about the being together, the understanding that you're not alone, that people are going through the same struggles you're going through, especially for emerging filmmakers to see the production designer of Barbie or the production designer of Avatar, and they're telling you the same problems you have on your, like, you know, $500,000 set. And to understand that we're struggling together, I think that was really strong, and it gave such feeling of gratitude to everybody who participated. And so I kind of understood from that our industry is kind of unhealthy, and we are all often struggling, even, I would say, with our mental health, not to put it in a dark way, but, you know, we really could use support, and that the people that could give us the most support are actually our colleagues. So that was, to me, like a really deep understanding. And now we try to create a lot of even just meetups. Let's go have coffee. Let's just sit down and speak. Like, we try to be very egalitarian, invite anybody. We have sessions called Ask Us Anything. You know, it's really about connecting, because it's kind of like a circle of gratitude. The legendary designers feel the energy from the young designers, and the young designers are like so honored to be with the older designers. So yeah, to me that was the kind of more beautiful part of the story.
Ai, que bom. Eu vou fazer mais uma pergunta, tá? Aproveitar que você falou Ask Us. E eu não sei como isso funciona, mas fica uma ideia aqui de repente, ter uma IPDW aqui no Brasil, em alguma das próximas edições. Um gathering aqui no Brasil. Eu acho que isso é uma coisa legal, inclusive, né? Por questão de custos, tal, então envolver também, ou, enfim, qualquer outro país da América Latina, eu acho que facilitaria também. Então, fica aqui um convite, uma proposta.
I think that, I think the first steps of that is what's going to happen this year, which is Production Design Week, because we returned from the gathering and we said, okay, the gathering was this incredible thing, but only 250 people, even though it was the most ever, were able to participate. So how can we spread what we learned, this kind of spirit of gratitude? And we feel like it is in this International Production Design Week because it's a very, we call it in the US, grassroots event. We're basically opening it up to anybody who wants to do an event, and we support people because we're just a platform to help you market your event. So like you're a graphic designer, you're an art department coordinator, you want to do an event about costume design and cinematography, do it. Like, we're going to support, we're going to put this event on, we're going to help. So the idea is to get it, it's kind of limitless possibilities, and I think like what you're talking about first has to happen on a local level of everybody, all the different regions from Brazil, because Brazil is so huge and has different production cities, how all the regions connect, perhaps how other Latin American countries can connect. And so I think that it can happen in stages. And we find that the most help is when we work with local organizations, like Brada is super, super powerful in how to infiltrate the local landscape. Some stuff can be done universally, but a lot of real progress is made on the ground.
Desculpe, eu participei da última, a gente fez várias atividades aqui, mas eu errei, o que eu falei é o gathering, em vez de acontecer sempre na Grécia. Não. Mas sim, muito obrigada.
Olá, primeiro eu gostaria de agradecer muito a sua presença aqui, você ter trazido a sua experiência, o seu trabalho, que é tão lindo. A gente quer ser você quando a gente crescer. E você trouxe 3 trabalhos muito diferentes um do outro, né? Você trouxe um pré-pandemia, um durante a pandemia e um pós-pandemia. E a minha questão é, o que você trouxe de adaptação que você teve que fazer na pandemia, que você carrega com você hoje para os seus projetos? Quais as lições e aprendizados que você adaptou para poder trabalhar e se inovar sempre? Obrigada, viu?
Thank you very much. Well, first of all, I'm going to say in general that what I really enjoy about our profession, even though it's really difficult to just jump into a project and you kind of disappear into the universe of the project, then you emerge 6 months later, you have no idea what happened in the world. But the beautiful thing is, after every project, you can take time to reflect on what happened and kind of think to yourself, okay, what do I want to take from here? What do I want to leave behind? What worked, what didn't work? And I try to do that after every project. Often we jump from one project to another and we sort of forget to take this time to really reflect. And I think that it's really healthy to think back on your experience. So thank you for asking what worked in that moment or what I learned. Look, I think one thing that we all are part of is that we used to hate virtual existence, and now we live virtually. So, having Zoom meetings that are virtual, being able to converse across time zones, and some things that you used to think can only be happening in an office, nowadays maybe not true. So taking the advantages of that system. At the same time, I'm very grateful that in the film industry you cannot make things completely virtually and still everybody have to be in one place and talk to each other. So I felt actually very lucky during the pandemic when most of my colleagues that have regular jobs were just at home. I was like in really, after this movie, I went to a really desolate part of Ireland to make a movie. So I felt like my life was just as adventurous as always, and I was very grateful to the film industry for that. So I think one part is that type of virtual exchange that I think happens now more easily. We also learned to work with communication methods like Slack, Dropbox, WhatsApp in Brazil, though in the US nobody uses WhatsApp. It's kind of sad. So, how to work a little bit more with communication methods, which I think if you're an organized person, it's very helpful to kind of expand on that. Another thing that I learned, which I think it's helpful for everybody to speak about, and I think it's being spoken about more, is that we have to be more flexible in our work styles, because it's very, very difficult to work 12 hours a day. I don't know about Brazil, but in the US we work minimum 12 hours, and you start at a certain hour and you end at a certain hour. And it used to be like a factory like that. And nowadays, I think people are having different priorities, especially after the pandemic, about how to prioritize their mental health, their family, their lifestyle. And so, a lot of our colleagues, and we have sessions about that at the collective, how do we make our art department a healthier space for people so that it doesn't feel like you have to be at the office at 7 and you have to be there till 9, whatever it is that we have all structured ourselves to believe, that there are other ways to do things. It's a slow-moving conversation. Not everybody feels comfortable with it. But for example, just knowing if somebody doesn't feel well, they can take the day off. Nothing is going to fall apart. Maybe if the designer has to leave, maybe that is possible, especially at the gathering. It's so difficult to persuade designers that they could leave their movie for even one day. They think the world is going to fall apart. And it took a lot of courage for designers to leave their projects and come to Greece for a few days. It was really, really, really difficult. And so we feel like we need to say thank you to all of those designers that actually said to their producers, there is something that's more important to me than these 4 days on set. So having that kind of worldview, I think since the pandemic it's changed a little bit, and I do think that it's helpful at the end of the day to adapt a more agile way of how the art department would work. If my set decorator has a 4-year-old and she needs to go pick him up from the school, then I would say, okay, you go pick him up, and I trust that at night you're going to be continuing to work or do whatever you want. Trust your crew more, feel like you're more flexible to their needs. It's still a really, really difficult give and take, so I think we're all learning, but I think that sort of came with the pandemic.
Olá, boa noite. Minha pergunta é um pouco simples. Eu estava pensando um pouco na questão da sustentabilidade, quando a ideia é que tudo é possível, né? Você está criando um mundo e para onde tudo isso vai, né? Existe essa questão de pensar isso, essa conversa, porque no Brasil a questão da sustentabilidade, quando a gente pensa em production design, é meio que natural, porque a gente faz o que dá, né? Faz o que pode, geralmente a gente pode pouco. Então, como isso se resolve? Obrigada.
Yeah, thank you for that question. I think it's a really important and also difficult subject that we have been having sessions about and meetings on in our collective for quite a few years, and no one has a perfect answer, to be honest with you. Like, I'm also part in my union in the US, I'm also part of these conversations about sustainability, and everyone is trying, but there isn't a perfect solution. I think that there are a few ways of looking at it. One, as you said, which comes a lot from countries where there's less resources. For example, in the first gathering, we had a session about sustainability with one of the panelists was an African designer from Ghana. Right? So of course they have to be sustainable because they have to just invent ways to reuse materials. And so that's kind of one way to think about it. How do we reuse materials? Can we reuse the wood? There's a lot of new initiatives happening. We have, for example, designers in France. France is very advanced in sustainability practices and production design. And they're trying to, again, very ambitious, but perhaps could be done here because of Projac, because I've seen it happen in global, that you can standardize sets. So for example, all of the windows are the same size, all of the doors are the same size, you have this big like a servo, and you're just going and you're picking your doors and your windows. That is a very sustainable method of working. And when the old golden age of Hollywood used to exist with the big studios, it's how they worked. Like if you were making a film in the 40s, you just had to go to pick your couch from the prop house of Warner Studios. And so that's why Globo still has it in the telenovelas, but almost nobody has it outside of Brazil, in fact. So how to maybe standardize sets and start creating a world in which you need a door, you go to this place and you pick a door that somebody already used and then they returned. So that's like a kind of very ambitious way of thinking. Another way is what materials to use. So there's companies now that make sets out of reusable material, recyclable material. So we work with companies that do like stuff from pulp, which is like, a breakdown of wood. In New York, we work with a company that harvests sustainable wood to make our wood flats from. So trying to find sustainable materials, if you're already using them, at least they're recyclable. Like literally even your paper in the art department, use harvested material that is recyclable, for example. So those are other things. And I think the biggest thing that we can all do, and perhaps is the easiest way to think about it, is how to buy thrift and return to the thrift cycle, right? So that we do anyway, because we love vintage stores. I think in Brazil there's less, but in the US it's a gigantic economy of secondhand stores. So we do that all the time anyway. And then how do they return to circulation, right? How can they serve other people and or other productions? So in New York, for example, we have a really tight network called Art Cube, where you could just write, it's like a huge listserv that every art department coordinator is on, and they're like, hey, we're about to toss out a kitchen set. Who needs a kitchen set? And immediately that kitchen set will be gone because there's so many student films, short films. And so trying to kind of put together a network that could help circulate, it's like circular economy, but only in the art department world, and then whatever can be donated to charity, immediately donated. So for example, we had a session with a production designer who told us about a huge TV show that he made for one of the networks, and his biggest goal was to empty the warehouse 100% only by donating. Nothing goes to the dumpster. That was his big thing. And so he worked from the beginning of the production with a special assistant to figure out which, okay, we have 3 fake trees. Who's going to take the 3 fake trees, right? And so it's a lot of work, and you need a person just specifically for that. But at the end of the day, he showed us a picture of an empty warehouse. So I think the efforts are being made, and it's just a matter of thinking about everything as you start, which we don't tend to do. We just tend to start immediately, and then you end up with a prop house full of things, and you're like, oh yeah, what do we do now? So trying to think a little bit ahead, I think, is the sort of best practice.
Oi, aqui. Boa noite. Meu nome é Arthur, eu sou fotógrafo, e eu queria ouvir de você, na verdade, como é que é a sua relação com o departamento de fotografia na produção de um filme.
Great. I love that question. So most of my films have had really amazing work relationships with photographers. Some of my best friends are cinematographers, and sometimes I'm lucky enough to work with them, which is even better because then you really get into someone's head because they're your friend and they're going to trust you with their questions. I think the film with Pedro is actually a really, really, really great example of working with the cinematographer, because the thing about Pedro is he's really used to his way of doing things, and you need to sort of subtly push him in certain directions. And so the only way to do it is if you're really united in your vision and you speak about everything in advance. And it's like, okay, you try to persuade him from this side, I try to persuade him from this side, and you have to have each other's backs, right? And in fact, on Pedro's film, we had that also with the costume designer, makeup. We were kind of united. But I love cinematography. First of all, I make a lot of efforts to understand what's going on, know the type of I'm also lucky to be working with film a lot. So I've worked with probably more than 50% of my movies were shot on film. So I love film. So I'm just kind of like a film buff. And so I learn a lot about the process, about the lenses. I share that with my art department as well, because I think it's important that we all know the ratios and so on. I think the thing that's hardest, which I'm sure you all know, is that art department starts early, and a lot of times the cinematographer comes later, right? At least that's how it is in other places. I'm not sure about Brazil. Perhaps you could have conversation before, but the actual time in prep is shorter for a DP. So starting those conversations early, if the DP is available, is really, really helpful. So the funny thing that happened on Pedro's movie, which has never happened to me before, I had thousands of weeks of prep, and the DP had 3. So, you know, I was in the scout van when we were in very, very early New York scout with the DP in the early days, and I heard him asking, like, hey, so how much prep time do I have? And the producer was like, 3 weeks, and I had 27 weeks of prep, right? So he was like, sorry, I didn't hear well. I think you said 3 weeks. It's like, yeah. And he was like, no, but listen, I have to come early. What am I going to do? The set is already going to be built, blah, blah, blah. I want to come 5 weeks before. And the producer said, you could come 5 weeks before, but Pedro's not going to speak to you because he's not interested in cinematography until about 3 weeks out, right? So super unusual. And I was like, wow, I am going to build an entire world without the DP being there. So immediately I was like, okay, Edu, if you're game, I will just keep you in the loop the whole time. And so we were having super long calls every week where I was like, okay, Edu, this is happening. What do you think about this idea? And you also have to be the representative of the DP, especially in location scouting, because you can love a room on the 7th floor, how is that going to help production, right? So you have to think a lot for the DP as well. And so it's really, really important to get started early on that relationship. If you don't know the DP, befriend them early on. And I think it's really helpful if the DP is into it to really have that conversations early, to be their kind of eyes on the ground. And I think that really worked in the case of Edu. He came in already much more prepared because I was always talking to him, showing him things, asking him even really small questions about lighting before he even started. I think the harder thing is once shooting gets underway from day one on set, it's sort of like the DP and the director become like married, and then the production designer is lost somewhere in the background. You're like, what? I thought I was married to the director. And then, no, you've been replaced. So how to be able to join the conversations once shooting starts happening is really hard, and I usually really feel like the director needs to have my back. I had the director's back in prep. The director needs to have my back when we shoot. And inevitably, really important conversations happen when I'm not there, right? And so how am I going to know? I'm like trying to figure out my day. Okay, if I'm on set around lunchtime, that's probably when they're going to talk about the important stuff, right? And it's a bit unfair for us because we're running around everywhere. And the crew kind of feels like, oh, they're never here, forget it. Like, we'll just talk about this important thing right now. And it's important for the DP to kind of know, no, the production designer needs to have a voice in this, and they probably have really good solutions for our problems on set. So trying to understand how to work in prep and in physical production and also in post, right? So talking about color grading in advance, talking about VFX together in advance, I think, yeah, going through the project together like real partners.
Oi? Muito boa noite. Meu nome é Georgia, eu sou estudante de fotografia, fotógrafa, há 2 anos. E a minha dúvida é um pouco parecida com a do Arthur, mas é mais na relação de mudança de foco, de estudo e como eu posso aderir os meus conhecimentos de fotografia, cinematografia, para a questão de production design, como eu posso entrar nessa pesquisa, como eu posso aderir a essa área, que é uma área que eu tenho muito interesse, enfim.
Great, yeah. In general, you mean as a cinematographer or just as anyone? Anyone who wants to get started?
Eu tenho muito interesse em direção de fotografia, direção de arte e production design, então acho que da relação da fotografia para aderir a essa área, não sei se ajudou.
Yeah. No, I think first of all, these are very similar areas, and I think we should acknowledge that we're doing really similar things, you know, and one couldn't exist without the other. So I feel like it's very natural to really care about both things. Most cinematographers that I know love fine art photography just as much as I do. We are all like, you know, fanning out about like new art books and so on. So I think often we are very connected in the kind of art we love and the kind of cultural expression we want to give. And I think that the issue mostly is one of structure, is that there's never enough time and there's never enough money for us to really take interest in what the others are doing. Like, my fantasy is to have this day on set called Open Truck Day, when all the trucks could be inviting other people. You know, you go to the gaffer's truck, you're learning about how they're doing things. Go to the grips, you know, the grips go to the costume truck. They see how the costumes are getting made, you know, and we never do that. We think we know what other people are doing, but at the end of the day, it's a pretty superficial understanding. And so finding the time to really understand what your colleagues are going through and what their design process is really hard to do when the second you start a movie, you already don't have enough money, don't have enough time, don't have enough crew. So how to find that time? I think that it's between the projects. So for example, when I have time between projects, in the past, I've gone to visit my friends who are colorists, and I sit in their coloring room and I see how they color. They just let me. I've gone to VFX houses that I've worked with before, and I'm like, hey, do you mind if I just walk around for the day? And everyone is super welcoming, and they show me how things are getting done, and it's really, really helpful for my career. And it's the time when I'm actually able to do it. I've been to film festivals where I've gone to these kinds of mesas, like we did this week, and you hear about other people's processes, what's happening in the cinematography world, what happens in post, which designers kind of have no idea about. And so I think it's when you have the time, like really ask your colleagues to enter into their universe for a little bit. And I think that is really, really helpful when you start a project and you're already like, oh my God, like, I don't know how, I don't have time to speak to the VFX supervisor. Thank God I went to the VFX house last month, and now I can, you know, take from that conversation. So I definitely recommend when you have time off, even though often we don't want to think about movies at all when we have time off and we just need to recover. But I would say this is the time to really explore what our colleagues are doing.
Eu acho que a gente está chegando no final.
Sim. Tem mais uma pergunta, é isso? Só tem mais uma pergunta do rapaz aqui na frente, ó.
E ninguém vai embora, que vai ter o sorteio.
Daí.
Boa noite, meu nome é Rob, eu sou estudante de audiovisual e uma das maiores preocupações atuais é sobre a inteligência artificial. Eu queria que você falasse um pouquinho sobre como essa inteligência artificial pode evoluir alguma coisa junto com a produção de direção de arte.
Com VFX? Não entendi. Inteligência artificial.
Como é que ela pode ajudar?
Well, you picked the right question to end this on. I think, I mean, we also heard some of the other mesas this week, because obviously it's a big question and we're all thinking about it. Look, it's a new technological advancement, just like virtual production entered into our universe about 5 years ago, and everybody said that the whole world is going to change. The world didn't change. So I feel like in general, every few years a new technology comes and we have to embrace it. What I think is important for us to know as art department people is that we need to do a really good job at understanding this technology, because if we don't, other people will, and we will be replaced. And so by robots. And so I think that when we think back on the sort of digital revolution that happened in film, probably starting the early 90s, when we moved from manual production, shooting on film, to digital production, and everything started becoming digital, the cutting, you know, and visual effects, I think the production design universe, the art direction universe, and the art department lost its place. They could have been ahead of the game and taken over some things that we have sort of now lost our control over, mostly VFX, right? So I think I wasn't there, but I'm assuming that people who are like, digital is never going to happen. I'm going to continue to draw my sets by hand for a few more years, and then we'll see what happens, and blah, blah, blah. Fast forward 20 years, and we're sitting here listening to VFX supervisors speaking about stuff that is art department's responsibility and should have production designers sitting here talking about. And so we lost ground to other people who were more technologically savvy and figured out how to take advantage of this new technology. Because at the end of the day, whether it's made by robots or it's made by us by hand, it's all the landscape of the film, which is the visuals of the movie, and that is our responsibility as production designers. So if we don't learn now how to harness this technology, which is mostly generative AI is what we're talking about, right? Creating imagery with AI. If we don't learn now how to do it ourselves, then VFX is going to figure it out. And not just VFX, but tech companies and directors who now think that they can speak to OpenAI and create their movies. And so it's really important to learn as much as possible about what is possible for us, and then also understand how to put our own mark on generative AI, because you can prompt anything on generative AI, and you can hear from a lot of designers, because there's some designers very advanced already in using this tool. It never comes out the way you had imagined it, right? Which is very similar to any design process. Like you always imagine the perfect set, and it never comes out like you imagine it. So it's another part of, okay, I'm going to prompt it, and then I'm going to talk to it again. Then I'm going to take it to Photoshop, and then I'm going to have some, and I'm going to give it to my concept artist. And so we are really important in that process of arriving at a really good result. And so the production designers who are really advanced with this already, they're creating incredible things. At the moment, I don't think any of it could be used because there's a copyright issue and you can't license any art made by AI because it's made by robots. But who knows what the future will bring? It seems like people are kind of beyond ethics at this point and are just embracing AI for everything in our lives. So I think for us, it's worthwhile spending time like, oh, I heard there's an AI workshop, or maybe I will sign up for, one of the AI platforms and play with it for a month, so that next time there's a conversation like that on set, you're not behind as a production designer. You can take over. And I feel that about VFX, because knowing the language of VFX, I'm always putting myself into that conversation. And when everybody else realizes I'm knowledgeable, then I have the space there. So as with every technology, I feel like if you know it, you can decide whether you want to use it or not. But the most important thing is to know it.
Ótimo. Bom, eu queria agradecer a Inbal. Muito obrigado. Carol, Cláudia, muito obrigado. Agradecer a todos. Mais uma vez, agradecer à Cinemateca e seus funcionários. Dizer que o ano que vem estaremos aqui. Em maio, esperamos todos vocês.